Hey everyone, my name is Shanice and welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be wrapping up all of the books that I read in the fantastic and very unexpectedly positive month of May. So here is the pile that I did finish. There is one more that isn't on this pile, and you'll see why in a second. I want to dive right in because I just generally had a pleasant overall experience with the books that I was reading in May. But as usual, I'm going to start off my wrap up with my least favorites to my most favorites. The first one is a 2-star read. That is Cat Person and Other Stories by Kristen Rupenian. It was originally published as You Know You Want This, and if you have never heard of Kristen Rupenian, she was catapulted into viral stardom with her story Cat Person. It was published in The New Yorker, I think in 2017. It tells of this story of a young girl named Margot who works at a movie theater, and one day this guy, an older guy, comes in. His name is Robert, and they spark a very modern day, millennial, very relatable, awkward, and unfortunate relationship, if you even want to call it that. They go on a few dates, and yeah. So that became a viral hit when it came out. A bunch of publishing houses vied for Kristen Rupenian for whatever it was that she was going to put out, and Simon & Schuster, I think, was the publisher that got her. She got like a $1.7 million book deal, which is unheard of. And this book, You Know You Want This, that was the result, unfortunately. So this is a short story collection and has 12 stories. When it was republished with the new name, Cat Person and Other Stories, they added a last 13th story. So what can I say? Cat Person is undoubtedly the standout. I first read it a few years ago in my graduate program, and I really liked it. I think Rupenian, when she is very good, she writes psychologically unnerving tales. I think her writing is very accessible. If you're looking for like florid and really lyrical prose, I don't think she's that kind of writer, and she doesn't have to be. She is more focused on gray spaces, very psychologically repulsive characters. She's unafraid to write weird, awkward, creepy characters and stories. Other than Cat Person, I don't think those talents shine in many of the other stories. The one that I thought kind of had it until it didn't, until it shattered at the end, was this one called Sardines. It was so good, and then it just flattened out, and yeah, I feel like Rupenian in these stories was kind of following like a writing prompt for each. You know, what is the craziest plot that you can think of? Write a short story. I don't think the stories, though, balance realism and fantasy as well. I also don't think that they handle pacing and the unraveling of suspense. I think a lot of these kind of reveal themselves too quickly, wrap themselves up too quickly, explain themselves too much. They are humorous and very dark. If you're looking for stories that lift you up, this is not the book for you. Despite not loving this collection, I gave it, 2 stars, mainly because the premise of each story was genuinely interesting, and I was hoping that they would flow and reveal new things and interesting things and unexpected things, not in a corny way, but in, a very literary way. I didn't find that happened, unfortunately. But if anything, I would say, read Cat Person. There's one story, The Good Guy. I think it was like 50 pages long. I hated that one. That was the worst story of the collection. There's another story that is like a fable, and it was just, it didn't match the rest of the collection. But yeah, overall, 2 stars. Definitely not the best collection I've ever read. Next up, let me just get it, is a book that I read for my reading group class, and it's called Roses in the Mouth of a Lion by Bushra Rehman, and I gave this 2.5 stars. This is about a young girl, I forget her age, but she's in middle school, I think. She lives in Corona in Queens, and she is of a Pakistani heritage. Her entire family are immigrants. She's firstborn US American, and so we're just kind of following her friends, her family life, how she is coming of age and learning about herself and her place in the world. I felt like this read kind of like elevated YA. There's nothing wrong with YA, but I guess I just wasn't expecting that going in. It is kind of touted as a queer coming of age story. I didn't really find that matched the novel until the very end, but having said that, this is a coming of age tale, so the character herself is kind of grappling with who she is, so perhaps it is realistic that that part of her identity didn't come into focus until the end, but it just felt a little disappointing, and not as immersed in that throughout. This is told in a sort of truncated way, where each of the chapters, they're like vignettes really. So one chapter is Garden of Rocket Ships, the next is The Pleasure of Flames. They're very short, just kind of different moments, scenes, thoughts from the main character. If you remember, last month I read Activities of Daily Living by Lisa Xiao Chen, and I loved that book, and similarly it had vignettes or like chapters that were kind of arranged around different thoughts, different observations. So, you know, I liked it then. I didn't love it here. I think it's mainly because of the writing style. I just found it a little bit too young for me. It might just be a me thing, not a book thing. I did appreciate the exploration of violence and how it relates to beauty. I think that's present in the title, you know, Roses in the Mouth of a Lion. It's almost like, is the lion this supposedly violent creature offering this beautiful rose? Is it something that you're supposed to grab but you're also threatened by violence again? Or, you know, just even in a rose, the fact that it has thorns. There are scenes in here with roses and flowers, as well as, and warning, cruelty to animals. So yeah, it's really kind of finding or exploring finding that equilibrium of danger and beauty. I also liked, and this is something that I don't often find in literature, how it showcased the relation between Pakistani culture and Dominican culture. I am Dominican, if you don't know that, and that is certainly my experience where I grew up. The Pakistani community and the overall Hispanic community, I felt there was a connection and an interchange. Like, one of my closest friends is Pakistani, and I've known her for years and decades, since like the 2nd grade. So that is a natural community, and I like never see that portrayed ever. And so that was portrayed here. I will say some of the Dominican characters in here are a little stereotypical, but there are people who act like a stereotype in real life, and that's not bad. And also the character is very young, so if anything, it just shows that she's probably repeating things that she's learned. But yeah, overall, it was a little predictable for me, but sweet. Just maybe a case of I expected too much out of it, and it was kind of doomed to be a little bit disappointing. So I gave it 2.5. Next up, I finished Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. I wanted to read this mainly because I am in a writing mood as of late, and I wanted some advice. I wanted to polish up my discipline and just go for it. So I picked this up. This has a lot of really good reviews. I gave it 3 stars. I think I have to credit this for putting me in that very productive writing spirit. This isn't going to be telling you things that you don't know, but mainly repeating things that you need to hear. One of the main things is that if you're interested in writing, the most important thing that you have to know is that you will write terrible drafts, and you can't let that stop you or crush you or defeat you. You have to just keep writing. You have to write every single day for as little or as much as you can, and just know that it might take 20 pages, 7 drafts for you to come to that beautiful sentence, that idea that sparks in you this new journey into writing a novel, a different short story. But you have to write those 7 horrible drafts, or write the 7 or 10 pages of terrible writing to get to that good point. You won't get there if you don't start writing, which is obvious advice, but I think a lot of us just need to hear that. So I highly appreciated Anne for reiterating that. She has a very easy and nice way of communicating. I can see why she teaches creative writing, or writing in general. She knows how to say things in a new way, or in a way that feels new, to inspire you. So I do appreciate that. It wasn't, you know, completely revolutionary, and I honestly don't think any book with tips on writing is ever going to be, because we know what we have to do. It's like when you need to go on a diet or you lose weight. You want that magic solution, but really it's just exercise and eat a balanced, healthy, nutritious diet, you know? We don't want to hear that, but that is the truth. And similarly with writing books, it's like, just sit down and write, and keep doing it and don't stop. That is the advice. Anne has a lot of blind spots, lots of racial blind spots. I didn't know anything about her, but this is a picture of Anne. There's one point, let me see, I don't know if I could find it, but she is talking about Latin American literature, specifically Isabel Allende, and yes, so this is on page 183. So she is talking to her students, and she's saying, "Now, I love Miss Allende's work, as I love a number of South and Central American writers. When I read their books, I feel like I'm sitting around a campfire at night, where they are spinning their wild stories, etc., etc. I understand why the style is so attractive to my students. It's like primitive art. It's simple and decorative, with rich colors satisfying old forms, and a lot of sophistication underneath that you feel but don't really see." Okay, very condescending, primitive art. It doesn't sit right with me to describe it like that. I don't think she meant it in a wrong way, but come on. Latin American writers are supposed to feel like, what, gracious? Wow. You know, we are simple writers, but we have some sophistication underneath. Come on. So yeah, 3 stars. Okay, then the next book I gave 3 stars to is coincidentally my Latin American pick for the month of May. It was Melissa Cardoza's 13 Colors of the Honduran Resistance. This is kind of what it says on the title. Melissa Cardoza is an activist, a feminist, an essayist. Here she tells of the diversity of the Honduran freedom movement after the 2009 military coup in Honduras, and she explains the diversity by focusing on 13 women of the movement, and those women themselves represent bigger groups of people. She illustrates the quilt, the varying quilt of what makes up the movement. I loved learning about just what happened in 2009 in Honduras, and I liked that Cardoza focused on Garifuna Hondurans, other Afro-descendants in Honduras, indigenous Hondurans, trans Hondurans, queer Hondurans. Like, she does a fantastic job of showing us modern Honduras. Very grateful for that. I will say, you know, if you can see, it is very short. This doesn't go into much depth. It is very emotionally written. She knows all of the women that she has written about here. I loved hearing what she had to say about the United States. It was very apt and very true in terms of its role in imperialism and leading countries like Honduras into the situations that they are in today. I guess one thing, I don't know much about, what is this? Who is this publisher? El Baseman Press. I should have known. Well, El Baseman Press, I'm so sorry, but you need like a resident copy editor, proofreader. There are so many mistakes. Sometimes the translation, which here is by Matt Ginsberg Jekyll, for the most part it was good. There were questionable moments in one of the 13 stories. We focus on this young man, and I think the translation is trying to portray kind of like the pedestrian way of that young person's speaking mannerisms. I just have a hard time rendering it true in Spanish, and I can compare because this is a bilingual edition. Ooh. So the Spanish is on one side and the English is on the other, and sometimes the translator would translate that young kid's language as like "ait," like A apostrophe IGHT, and you see on the Spanish like there is no slang in that sentence. Don't understand why it had to be there. And then there was this other part where the English is saying the guy is as black as my Uncle Ramon, but on the Spanish it's actually saying this black guy looks just like my Uncle Ramon. So that shouldn't be a difficult sentence to translate. So there were moments like that. Yeah, overall I think maybe I could have picked a more substantive book from Honduras. This is not Melissa Cardoza's fault. In fact, she is an admirable activist. So I have learned some things, but I think I will need to take my curiosity elsewhere. And, you know, in the future I will pick maybe a novel or something from this country. Yet another 3 stars. This one is The Lying Life of Adults by Elena Ferrante, translated of course by Anne Goldstein. This is about what is she? 14 years old. She is 14 years old. Her name is Giovanna. She lives in Naples. She comes from a well-to-do, very intellectual, kind of upper society family in Naples. Her father, though, actually grew up in more of the Naples in the Neapolitan Quartet. Low income family of not very much education, and he kind of escaped that and turned his back on it. He has a sister named Vittoria, and Vittoria is always downcast. The father and really everyone in Giovanna's current life in the kind of wealthier neighborhoods doesn't talk about Vittoria, and when they do, she's like a demon, a monster, someone that you're not supposed to like. She's awful. Giovanna doesn't really know why. And so in the beginning, we start with Giovanna overhearing her father say that she looks like Vittoria, and Giovanna starts spiraling. She now thinks that her father thinks that she's ugly because she's just like Vittoria, and Vittoria is obviously someone you don't want to be like. And this prompts her into trying to meet Vittoria, and therefore opening a world that her father never wanted her to know about. It's also a coming of age. This book is fine. Ferrante, as usual, just knows how to write young women. She knows how to follow a spiraling, anxious thought in a beautiful but very honest way. So the character's interiority is ferocious and clear. She writes about class differences. Giovanna starts understanding and becoming more conscious of class as she delves more into Naples. She realizes it's her city, but she doesn't know like most of the city. She's never heard of the neighborhoods that Vittoria frequents. I guess my gripe is that this is not the Neapolitan Quartet. It covers essentially similar themes. The plot is a little thin. It is more about that interiority. It's more of a character study than anything else. I just, you know, have been there before with these themes with Ferrante, and I enjoyed them in her other books. So this wasn't bad at all. It's just, you know, nothing stand out in her bibliography, but I am glad that I did read this. And, you know, there are beautiful passages in here. Ferrante is a phenomenal writer, so you might get lucky if this is your first Ferrante and you haven't explored anything else, because if you like this, then you'll love practically everything else that she's written. Okay, yet another 3-star. This is my last 3-star book. This was my big book pick for May, and it is my signed copy of The Fraud by Zadie Smith. It is difficult to explain what this is about. Essentially, our main voice, our main character, even though there are many, is a woman named Mrs. Touchet. So Mrs. Touchet is a Scottish woman. She works for this writer, a real life figure, by the way. His name is William Ainsworth. At one point in time, he was, in fact, more popular, more well-sold than Charles Dickens, who he was sort of friends with until he got a little bit more successful, and then, you know, Dickens and his crew kind of made sure that Ainsworth was not successful beyond that. This is history, so, like, it's not really a spoiler of the book. It's just, it is what it is. So, Miss Touchet, she works for Mr. Ainsworth, who happens to be her cousin by marriage. So she is privileged to be an observer of this, like, writerly, intellectual class of people. She sits in on group meetings with Dickens, with Ainsworth, with other writers, other artists. And as a woman in that time, it's rare. So she's interested in gossip and the day-to-day of everyone around her. Now this big trial is taking place where she lives. This trial is the Tichborne trial. That itself is a real story of this guy who claims to be a man named Tichborne. Andrew Tichborne? Is it? No, Roger Tichborne. He used to oversee property in Jamaica. That is a sugarcoating of what he was actually doing. But he used to be in Jamaica. This man named Bogle was his kind of attendant. He worked for Tichborne. Bogle is Jamaican. And Tichborne goes off, I think he's traveling somewhere, and the boat sinks, and Tichborne is nowhere to be found. And so people assumed that he passed away. Then years later, I think in Australia, this guy claims, even though he doesn't look anything like Tichborne did years before, he claims that he is actually Tichborne. He never died. He just relocated to Australia and has been living there. So this becomes this legal case, very popular for the time, and Mrs. Touchet is, you know, just a curious observer in all of this. One of the star witnesses of the Tichborne trial is Bogle. So he comes to London, and as a black person in London at the time, kind of stirred a lot of news stories and attention. And Mrs. Touchet was just kind of obsessed with the trial and learning more about Bogle. And so this novel talks about all of that. It focuses on Mrs. Touchet, but it also gives perspectives of Bogle, mainly near the second half of the book. We see his time in Jamaica. We learn about his family, his love life a little bit. I think this was a lot to cover in this short book. It's short, I mean, it's obviously not short, but it's short for what it is trying to cover. I wouldn't have minded if this were way longer, if it were exploring all of those different plot points thoroughly. Here, again, with the kind of vignetted chapters, they're so short. They're like 1 to 2 to 3 pages. And it's supposed to mimic the style of almost like serialized works of the time. The chapter titles are like Visiting the Lady Marguerite Gardiner, Blessington, Spring 1836. Another one, The Ethiopians. Another one, What is Real? There are some that are like Thistlewood, Wedderburn, and the vignette is just the character remembering something. Here's the thing. Did I love reading it? Did I love that it was structured this way? No. Is Zadie Smith just a phenomenal, out-of-this-world writer and able to make the writing and the structure feel real? Absolutely. She's just incredible. Sometimes when a modern writer writes in the style of previous centuries, previous decades, you can feel it's forced. Here it doesn't feel forced at all. It seems like it's actually written in that time. Zadie Smith is a phenomenal wordsmith. You know, I don't know what to say. She's incredible. So she can make a book like this kind of work. And it is enjoyable, the portions that we read about Bogle and his time in Jamaica. I also think it's interesting and kind of a weakness of the novel to have centered the story on Mrs. Touchet. Does this reflect the fact that a lot of the stories of colonized people is usually told and promoted if it is written by a white person? Yes. Are a lot of those white people kind of self-righteous and self-aggrandizing, but in reality have a lot of blind spots, like Mrs. Touchet? Yes. So again, very realistic. I get it. However, I don't know, it would have been more interesting to read the story of the Tichborne trial from Bogle's perspective solely. I know Zadie Smith knows this. There was a very specific reason, I'm sure, for her to center it on Mrs. Touchet, which links to the title of the fraud, which, you know, explores deception and authenticity and who has a right to tell a story, and the use of storytelling as a fabrication, propaganda. I feel like I've read a lot of books that also explore that this year. So I get it. I get how it fits to what she was trying to do. I just think, just as an interesting story, it would have been better with Bogle as the main character. But yeah, this is a very self-aware book. Mrs. Touchet is, you know, problematic. She thinks she does well and she, you know, is a champion for race. But the book does acknowledge that actually, not really. She does make a spectacle of people who don't look like her, and she wants to use their stories to like feed her thirst of knowledge and then to use it for her own good. So we see her faults too. So if this were written by anyone other than Zadie Smith, I don't think it would have worked. I still think things could have worked better. But I'm glad that I did read it, and this is a signed copy. Like, wow, I'm honored. Next is my short story collection of the month of May. It is Lori Moore's Self-Help. Oh my god. How did it take me this long to read Lori Moore? I'm not sure. To get some of the maybe not great things out of the way, the language in here is outdated. Use of the R word, there's just some unfortunate things that are said here, but it is what it is, right? Looking beyond that, the writing is so like perfectly off kilter. Lori Moore has an amazing way of describing things. Some of the descriptors like come out of nowhere, but then you pause and it makes total sense. For example, in one of my favorite stories in here, called How to Become a Writer, this is the last line. Interesting, smiles your date, and then he looks down at his arm hairs and starts to smooth them, always in the same direction. It's so random, but then again, you pause. First of all, what an image, right? What a weird thing for someone to do on a ever, but like on a date. It just tells you so much about the characters. She says, your unmade bed, a huge open-faced sandwich. Like I would never think of an open-faced sandwich when I look at a bed, but then when she describes it that way, it's like, it's amazing. She is a very punny writer. She will have these lines like, the pair of sights, the parasites, or I long for you, I short for you, I wear shorts for you. In the last story, To Phil, I thought maybe the puns were getting too much, but then a character actually points that out. So that character tells the character who's been very, very pun heavy so far, he says, I'm worried about you. Everything's a joke. You're always flip-flopping words, only listening to the edge of things. It's like you're always constantly on the edge. And then I realized, okay, it's for a purpose. It's not just Lori Moore like having a little too much fun. It's supposed to be for fleshing out of a character. So it works. It's funny. It's weird. She also has this fabulous joke. This Danish is too Swedish to finish. So yeah, if you think that that's annoying, maybe this is not for you, but I just highly recommend this. Some of my favorites, I already mentioned How to Become a Writer, Amal and the Night Visitors, A Guide to the Tenor of Love, I think might be my favorite in the collection. To Phil is also great. Just phenomenal, phenomenal, phenomenal. I gave it 4 stars. One of my favorite short story collections of the year for sure. Next up is a book I also gave 4 stars, and it is Chlorine by Jade Song. One of my favorites of the year, absolutely. This is a weird one. It is about a teenage swimmer named Ren Yu, and she is obsessed with mermaids, folk tales about mermaids, international folklore around mermaids. She reads those tales obsessively since she's very young. She's very precocious, and I think generally she tends to only be obsessed with things when she likes them. And so when she finds swimming, she doesn't just swim casually, she makes it her main focus in life, and it matches what she already believes about herself. I think thanks largely to reading those mermaid tales. She believes truly and purely that she is a mermaid. She's just like disguised as a human for the time being, but she will find her way into becoming who she is. And so swimming for the time being gives her the pleasure of being in the water. She's really, really good at it. She has a very creepy, inappropriate, like dangerous for kids coach as her swim coach. He prides himself in having her on the team because she is going to bring them a lot of awards and stuff. A lot of the praise that she gets in swimming is very racialized because she's Asian. It's like they want to compliment her, but they're always trying to use her race as like the reason why she's good. It's not that she's good, it's like, oh, you have this body because you're this race. Oh, you're hardworking because you're this race. There's always that assumed factor of, oh, your race, instead of just focusing on her as an individual. This is just so unique. It made me fall in love with writing again. Writing can be so freeing, so uninhibited, and Jade's song just reminded me of that power. Reading this, it was like I wanted to write as well. It just felt like it was moving and playful, and she was having so much fun with the sentences and the theme and the plot, and I thought the plot was very concise. The only thing I would say, and with a lot of these stories that kind of bridge the animal world and humans, like Bunny, if you will, or like The Pisces by Melissa Broder, or even, well, maybe not Bear, but yeah, those titles. Sometimes it kind of falls apart at the very end, and I don't think it falls apart here, but I feel like, yes, we can suspend our disbelief for the majority of this. There was just something that I still needed explained about why Ren, how does she go from loving the stories of the mermaids to then believing she is one? I guess that's the part that through the end I still wasn't sure about. We were just kind of like supposed to believe it, but I have questions. So that was really the only thing that kept this from being 5 stars. I thought the incorporation of the letters from Ren's friends, if you will, were brilliantly placed. The way that they were unfolded and the way that they interacted with everything around them, phenomenal. Just magically put together, fun and exciting and new and fresh, and such a unique way of exploring queerness and like a metamorphosis into, not even really a metamorphosis, but becoming who you are, self-identification. Yeah, maybe this is more what I expected from Roses at the Mouth of a Lion. This is one of my favorites of the year. And then, I can't believe this. I knew I would love this book. I've been mentioning it a little bit in the past few months. I just didn't think it would actually pan out into a 5-star read. This is If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga. This is phenomenal. This is phenomenal. Okay, this is about an American young lady of Egyptian background. She's first-generation American. Her parents were born in Egypt, but came to the United States. This American young woman is highly educated, very smart. She chooses to move back to, she's not moving back herself. I guess ancestrally she's moving to her roots in Egypt. She moves to Cairo. In Cairo, she meets this Shobrahite young man. This young man comes from extreme poverty. He describes in the beginning having 1/4 of a peach for dinner distributed amongst his family. So he kind of escapes Shobrahit to be in Cairo, and to find work, find something new to do, because he can't be there. He can't be trapped. If he stays there, he will be doomed to stay in poverty. So this Shobrahite boy and the American girl kind of spark a relationship of sorts. I feel like this is the book that I wish I could have written. I, for better or for worse, relate to the questions that the American girl kind of thinks through, ponders. She is very much working through post-colonialism, language anxiety, feeling like an other in a place that's supposed to be part of you, dual identity, biculturalism. She's portraying an Egypt not of fantasy, not sponsored by tourism or anything, but one that's kind of sad. You see the reality of the way that darker skinned people are treated in Egypt. It's not just an Egypt thing, it's a international thing. Here, some of the like servants or the maids, the people that work in the homes are Sudanese, or in other ways like Afro-Egyptian. What can I say about this? First of all, the writing. Let me just find some gorgeous examples. She says things like, I dried myself with a towel, and in the mirror a tripod covered in skin revolved, pretending to be my body. He ate slowly, as though thinking through the quinoa. This is something that the American girl says about the boy from Shobrahit. She says, a foreigner would be too obvious a symbol of empire, come in crop top to colonize his body. She'd be out of his league, historically humiliating. To sleep with her would be treasonous at best. On the other hand, a real Egyptian doesn't work either. Self-loathing bleeds out beyond his self until the idea of taking a compatriot lover feels paradoxically beneath him, a waste of his potential. He'd be selling short. With me, he gets the cream of both worlds. I am Egyptian, recognizable but also improved by Western inflection, carrying in my fashion sense and orthodontically straight teeth the whiff of opportunity, opulence, and pride. It just, like, every page is revolutionary. There's this other one, and this is wow. Those outside of a language, of a culture, see furniture through a window and believe it is a room. But those inside know there are infinite rooms just out of view, and that they can always be more deeply inside. I just can't get enough of this. So that's the phenomenal writing. The structure is so unique. The first part is kind of told like prompts, followed by like not even musings addressing the prompt, but just free thought flowing out of the question. Then the second part is they flip back and forth between perspectives. The whole book flips back and forth, by the way. And so you don't necessarily know who is speaking, but it is more like almost essayistic. And then the last part is kind of written like a play. Yeah, there you go. And this takes you out of the story and centers around a writing group reviewing or giving feedback on the first two parts that we read. So in the end, it's like a meta commentary on the novel itself. It's also looking at the performance of judging craft and how valid it is, and how reactionary feedback can be, and how like nothing is ever good enough for anybody. So it is a very self-aware book. I think this grapples with a lot of tough questions that like a lot of first generation people can relate to. It's just intelligent, concise, and experimental and new and moving. I just cannot believe a book like this exists, and I'm so fortunate to have read it. I just bought Nornaga's other work. It's like a prose poem, I think, and I think I need a little short break. I might explode if I read that one right away. But just wow, 5 stars, my favorite novel of the year. Sorry, Makioka sisters, you were my favorite, and now it's this one. This is post-colonial modern genius fiction. Amazing. Okay, that was it. What a month. Lots of 3 stars, but it could have been worse. And I encountered another 5-star read and 2 new favorite novels of the year. Pretty good, I would say. What was your favorite novel of the month of May? Or not just novel, but could be poetry, could be essay collection. Just what did you read that you absolutely loved in May? Let me know down below. And thank you so much as always for watching. I will see you all next week. Have a good week, guys. Bye.